Our next reader makes things for the internet. And who doesn't these days, right? He spends most of his time trying to convince large companies to approve his robot jokes. He also writes fiction, edits comedy, videos, and eats Chipotle. Please give a warm welcome to Ryan DiGiorgi.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank everybody. All right. This is a short story called Roger. It was perfect beach weather, and here I was at a cemetery. I should clarify that I love going to the beach when it's raining. That way I can run up and down the shore, pretending that I'm falling in love in an independent movie, and I don't even care how wet I'm getting. My point is, it was raining and I was at a cemetery. I was there to bury Roger, my best friend in the world. I should also clarify that Roger was a dog. I want to make that clear so that when I tell you how we've known each other since we were young, lived together for years, took long walks together, and all that stuff, you don't think I'm talking about another person. I guess it could be funny if you made that assumption, and then I said I was really talking about a dog, but that's the kind of shoddy narrative structure that could really confuse what I think is going to be a great story. As I stood in the rain, staring at Roger's grave, I thought about all the good times we had together, playing fetch, running up and down beaches in the rain, dog stuff mostly. I can't say his death had been a surprise. He'd been moving slower lately, and when he stopped moving entirely and started smelling terrible, I suspected the worst. I was wondering whether there were other dogs I should have invited to the service when suddenly someone behind me spoke. "Mr. Jones," said the voice. "Yes," I said. "Terribly sorry for your loss." I turned to see a tall man in a long black overcoat, black hat, and black gloves, wearing black-rimmed glasses and holding a black umbrella. The only thing about him that wasn't black were his eyes, which were a cool, steely gray. Also, he was a white guy. "How did you know my dog?" I asked, trying to make small talk. "It so happens," he said, "that I am an attorney for the deceased." This struck me as odd. I didn't know Roger had a lawyer. It certainly hadn't come up in all the time we'd spent together. Actually, and this might make me sound dumb, I didn't even know dogs could have lawyers. In fact, one time Roger bit a plumber, and I had to deal with the situation on his behalf. If he'd had his own lawyer, I'd have liked to know about it then. I don't mind telling you. "It's my duty," the lawyer went on, "to execute the terms of the deceased's last will and testament. You were mentioned as a beneficiary. If you'll come with me, we can take care of it now." On the one hand, I was flattered that Roger had thought of me. On the other, the chances of my dog naming me in his will seemed smaller than the chances I was talking to a crazy person who hung around pet cemeteries screwing with people. But I had to admit I was curious. Roger had always had an air of mystery about him. Sometimes he'd disappear for days, then show up again like nothing happened. Other times he'd see another dog in the street and start growling at him for no reason. Once I'd found him in the shower rinsing blood out of his fur. For a second I thought it looked like he'd been sewing up a bullet wound, but he slammed the bathroom door before I could be sure. I wanted to ask him about it, but he made it clear with tail movement and ear height that I should just let it go. I decided I had to know what this was about, and besides it gave me a polite way to leave without having to ask the pet cemetery guy if he accepted tips. "Fine," I said, "let's go." "We can wait until you're finished crying if you'd like," the lawyer said. Oh yeah, I didn't mention I'd been crying all this time. I was going to kind of brush past that since I wanted to see more macho in the story, but I forgot the other guy brings it up, so now I guess you know. After another 5 minutes, we left. Later that afternoon, I sat at a table at a nearby frozen yogurt place, looking at a small yellow envelope. This, according to the lawyer, was my inheritance. He told me I should open it quickly, but not in his office because the less he knew, the better. He wouldn't say what it was, how he got it, or how he became my dog's lawyer, no matter how many times I asked, or how many ways I tried to rephrase the questions to trick him. Eventually, we both got frustrated with each other, and I left. Carefully, I opened the envelope. Inside was a crumpled piece of paper. It was a page from one of those page-a-day desk calendars. Actually, it was from my page-a-day desk calendar. I wondered how Roger had gotten a hold of it. The date was January 1st, and on it I'd written my New Year's resolution: go to gym. At this point, it was April, and I'll admit I had never gone to the gym. I bought the membership, but I didn't go. Sure, it was embarrassing, but I didn't need my dead dog rubbing my nose in it. But then I thought maybe this was his way of telling me to take care of myself now that he was gone. That was sweet. Roger's passing did remind me that you never know how much time you got left in life. Another good reminder of that was that right then, some guy behind me got shot. Looking back, I should have realized that the whizzing sounds that had been going by my head for the last couple of seconds were bullets. I'd been so involved in the envelope and my frozen yogurt that I hadn't noticed the gunman in the van across the street. I felt even sillier when I realized he was aiming at me. If it hadn't been for the enthusiastic and unpredictable way I eat frozen yogurt, I might have been a goner. Thinking fast, I got up and ran through the back of the store. The cashier tried to tell me that area was for employees only, but she was shot before she got it all out, so I pretended to not hear her as I darted out into the alley behind the building. Let me tell you, all the exercise I had missed since January, I caught up on that day. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually it stopped being about escaping the assassin and started being about me. Sure, it had been hard at first, but now it felt kind of good. Maybe this was the runner's high I always heard about. Heck, maybe I would go back to the gym. In fact, I noticed as I jogged in place at a stoplight that the gym was only a few blocks away. The lady at the gym gave me a hard time over how long it had been, but after I signed some new paperwork, she let me go back to the locker room. My gym clothes were right where I'd left them, but in the left pocket of my shorts was a slip of paper. Curious, I opened it. It was a letter from Roger. Now, I hope you don't mind, but I'm not going to tell you exactly what the letter said. To be honest, it was pretty personal. I'd like to keep it just between Roger and me. But basically, Roger said what a good friend I'd been, how much our time together had meant to him, and how his life had been better with me in it. The L word did come up. By the time I finished reading, I was crying all over again, and I didn't care what all the naked gym guys thought. Roger said he'd always been able to trust me to look after him, and now he needed to trust me one last time. There was something he hadn't been able to do before he died, and he needed me to do it. He couldn't go into detail, but the main thing was for me to find this guy named Albert Simmons. He would know what to do. There was more in the letter, including a whole section explaining how Roger knew English, and how he managed to handwrite the letter in beautiful calligraphy with no thumbs. These parts were pretty mind-blowing, but they don't have much to do with the story, so don't worry about them. The only other important part was the cell phone in the right pocket of the shorts. Roger explained that it was untraceable, and that this Simmons guy's number would be in the contacts. The passcode for the phone was set to the date I had adopted Roger. Now, I hate to admit this, I really do. If there was any way to cut this part out of the story, I would, because it's pretty embarrassing, but that wouldn't be honest, and besides, I already told you I cried twice. The fact was, I didn't remember the date I adopted Roger. That didn't mean he wasn't important to me, but after Roger had taken the time to write such a great letter, I felt like a pretty big heel letting him down. I tried a few dates that I thought were close, but after 10 tries, the phone locked me out. Actually, it didn't so much lock me out as self-destruct. The explosion was impressively controlled, but it scared an old guy on the bench next to me, so gym security kicked me out. Looking back, I think Roger mentioned that the phone was untraceable because he didn't want anyone to know I was looking for this Albert Simmons guy. I say that because as soon as I got home and did a Google search for Albert Simmons, there was an immediate knock on my door. The guy outside said he was delivering flowers, but I knew something was up when I noticed he had a gun where his flowers should be. We were at pretty close range, so he probably would have hit me this time, and besides, I didn't want to burn myself out on running when I had just started to like it, so he waved me into the back of the van, and we drove away. 3 weeks later, I turned to the beautiful blonde next to me on the motel bed and said, "Vivian, that was the best sex I've ever had." I had said that to her because we just had sex. Before the sex, we checked into a seedy motel to hide from the people who wanted to kill me. Before that, we'd driven through the night for several hours until we were sure the people who wanted to kill me weren't following us. Before that, Vivian had rescued me from the warehouse where the people who wanted to kill me were torturing me for information about Albert Simmons. Before that was a whole lot of torture, and before that was the part where I answered the door and get kidnapped, so now you're all caught. "We didn't have sex," Vivian said, sexily. "You fell asleep with the magic fingers on." "Oh," I said, "well, you should try it, it's great." Last night, Vivian had explained that she was a friend of Roger's. She knew what Roger wanted me to do, and she knew where Albert Simmons was. Roger told Simmons to only deal with me, so Vivian was going to take me to him. I asked her what all this was about, but she refused to tell me anything. Well, she might have told me a few things, but it had been a long day of torture, and I think I fell asleep. Now that I was awake, Vivian casually shot the hitman who'd been hiding behind the drapes, and we left to see Simmons. Albert Simmons' workshop looked pretty much like you'd expect if you're familiar with the workshops of covert underground government biochemists. Me, I wasn't, so it was all new to me. When Vivian and I walked into the room, he shouted, "You're here!" and raised his hands up to indicate that he wanted to add "finally" to the end of that sentence. I misinterpreted this and went in for a hug. Which, to his credit, he returned. "There's precious little time," he said as he shoved a tiny green canister into my hands. "Take it and go." "Go where?" I asked. "To the drop-off point. Didn't Roger tell you anything? I swear to God, if he wasn't dead, I'd kill him again." Then he added, "My condolences." "Listen," I said, "I like to think I've been a pretty good sport, but it's high time I heard the full truth. Who are you people? What's in this canister? Why is everyone trying to kill me? And what does it have to do with my dog?" Making a stand like that felt pretty good. Unfortunately, most of my questions were drowned out by what sounded like a huge battering ram repeatedly slamming into the steel door of the workshop. "No time," Simmons repeated as the door hinges began to give. He ushered Vivian and I through a tunnel and out a side exit where a car was waiting for us. Vivian got in front with the driver, I got in back. Simmons tossed us some kind of GPS thing that would show us where to go, then he hopped on a motorcycle and disappeared into the woods. As the workshop exploded behind us, we sped off toward the drop-off point. When the car rolled to a halt 10 minutes later, we were on a barren strip of desert highway. I checked the GPS, but we were still miles away from the drop-off point. I thought maybe we stopped because there was something in the road, so I looked out my window and saw that there was. It was the body of the driver. I heard Vivian slide around the car and open my door. Her gun was drawn. "I'll take that canister, Mr. Jones." "Aren't we supposed to bring it somewhere?" I asked. Vivian laughed. "The people I work for have paid me handsomely to make sure it never arrives." I was hurt. Not just because Vivian lied about wanting to help with whatever the hell we were doing, and not just because we basically slept together. I was hurt because Vivian had betrayed Roger. "Vivian," I said, "I don't know how long you knew Roger, if you ever really knew him at all. But I knew him my whole adult life. He was a good dog, Vivian. He'd always come when you called him. He never barked at night, and if he was eating something he shouldn't be eating and you told him to drop it, he'd drop it. When it was cold and the heat didn't work, he'd lay on my feet to keep them warm. And when I didn't have time to scratch him because I was working on the computer, he understood. He didn't have to say it with words. I knew. He was loyal, Vivian, and a good friend, which is more than I can say for you. So if you want this thing so bad, you can go ahead and shoot me, because I'd rather get shot than let down my friend." Finally, someone else in this story was crying besides me. I was crying too, but between my sobs, I noticed a single tear roll down Vivian's face. "I did know Roger," she said, lowering the gun. "And he knew me. Better than I know myself, it appears. You've got another 8 minutes before it's too late. Go." And with that, she was gone. The next 8 minutes were a blur as I drove wildly in the direction the GPS pointed, ignoring traffic laws, other cars, and sometimes even the road. I nearly ignored the large black helicopter sitting on an isolated helipad in the middle of nowhere, until I realized it was right on top of the drop-off point. The helicopter ride was pretty uneventful. I couldn't really see out the window since they were blocked by the two large men I was sitting between. They spent most of the flight holding their ears and speaking frantically into their watches, but I didn't mind. I was too frazzled to make conversation anyway. In fact, I didn't say a thing the whole trip, until right at the end when I said, "Is that the White House?" Later in the Oval Office, I met the president. He wasn't very talkative at first. Instead of saying hello, he threw up violently into a bucket with the presidential seal on the side. He was greener than he looked on TV, and his hair was coming out in large clumps as he rolled around on his office couch. The room was full of various staff members, 5-star generals, and people in lab coats. None of them said hello either. They just grabbed the canister from me, pulled off the top, and poured it down the president's throat. Almost instantly, his color improved, the vomiting slowed to a trickle, and he got a whole lot friendlier. One of the lab coat guys put a stethoscope in his chest and listened for a second, then gave a big thumbs up. The room erupted in cheers. "My boy," the president said to me, "you have done your country a great service. What's more, I owe you my life." "Oh, good," I said. "Glad it all worked out. To be honest, though, I was just doing a favor for a friend." "Oh, yes," he nodded. "Roger." The president looked solemn as he glanced at the empty canister on the coffee table. Shame we couldn't have gotten this to him too, but the poison worked faster on his dog body. And no matter how much I argued, he always put his duty first. Yes, I agreed, he was like that. "Son," said the president, slapping me on the back, "you've proven yourself a vital asset to us, and if you're willing, I'd like to keep you on the team. Of course, you'll need a new partner." He gestured across the room where a brown and white Boston Terrier was listening in on a phone call to the Kremlin. I shook my head. "Thank you, sir," I said, "but that's not my dog. There's just no replacing Roger."